The howl pierced through the metal door of Cale's cabin at 2 a.m, not the distant cry of a wolf in the forest, but something sharper, rawer, the wail of a human infant tearing through the silence of the mountain. Cale had been awake already, standing at the window with his second glass of whiskey, watching the tree line blur beneath the October fog. The alpha of the Northridge pack did not sleep well on nights when the moon hung full and close. His beast paced under his skin, restless and hungry, and the only thing that kept him from shifting and running through the woods until exhaustion claimed him was the weight of responsibility and the thinning patience of his counsel. He turned from the window. The cry came again, more desperate this time, and something in it cut past the fog of the alcohol and the predator's indifference. It was a sound of absolute need. No calculation, no strategy, just raw survival instinct. Cale set down his glass and moved toward the door, his body already shifting into alpha mode before his mind had caught up with what he was doing. The night air hit him cold when he opened the door. The porch was dark except for the thin moonlight, and for a moment, he saw nothing but the forest beyond. Then he looked down. The basket sat directly on the threshold, woven willow, lined with what looked like a man's wool coat. Inside, bundled in a pink blanket that had been expensive once, was a baby, maybe 6 months old, her face blotchy and red from crying, her fists clenched so tight her tiny nails had drawn crescents into her own palms. She couldn't have been outside long. No hypothermia yet, no stillness, just fury and fear. Kyle's first instinct was to shut the door and pretend he'd heard nothing. This was trap territory, the kind of complication that pack alphas learned to spot before it sank its teeth in. But the scent hit him then, something that made his alpha pause mid-breath, something in the chemistry of her skin and tears that triggered recognition at a level deeper than thought. It was faint, nearly obscured by the generic baby powder and the foreign wool, but it was there. Unmistakable, dangerous. He crouched down, his massive frame making him look surreal beside the small basket. At 6'4" and 300 pounds of muscle and scar tissue, he was not built for gentleness, but his hands moved with surprising care as he lifted the note that had been pinned beneath the corner of the basket. The paper was thick, cream-colored, and the handwriting was small and hurried. "She's yours. Her name is Ivy. She has your eyes. I couldn't keep her safe where we are, and I won't let her grow up in that world. She belongs with her father. Raise her better than we raise our own. Don't come looking for me." M. Cale read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't change. The implications didn't soften. He looked back at the baby. Now that he was closer, the resemblance hit harder. The sharp line of her jaw, the pale gray of her eyes, the slight curl to her dark hair, his father's before him. The eyes that every member of the Northridge Council would recognize in a heartbeat. The baby had exhausted herself crying. Her breath came in hitching gasps, and her eyes had gone unfocused the way infant eyes do when they're running on empty. Kyle stood, the note still in his hand, the basket now cradled against his chest with an instinctiveness that surprised him. His beast had stopped pacing. It sat, attentive, focused on the warm weight in his arms with the intensity of something that had just found its purpose. He closed the door behind him with his boot heel and set the basket on the kitchen counter. The cabin smelled like whiskey and mail and the fading ghost of meat from the elk he'd hunted 2 days ago. It smelled like the home of a single predator, with no reason to apologize for it. It did not smell like a place where an infant slept. Cale pulled out his phone and called Marcus before he could talk himself out of it. His beta answered on the 4th ring, his voice rough with sleep. "Cale, it's the middle of the night. I need you at the cabin. Now. Bring Elise." Elise was Marcus's mate and the only female in the inner circle whom Cale trusted with anything that might prove delicate. "Is there a threat? Just come." Cale ended the call and set the phone on the counter beside the basket. The baby had fallen into the exhausted sleep of the depleted, her mouth open, one fist still curled tight. The pink blanket had slipped, and he could see the silver chain around her neck. Delicate, probably too delicate for a baby to wear, but hung there nonetheless. There was a small pendant on it, something that caught the kitchen light. Kyle leaned closer. A silver key, no larger than his thumb, intricate with a pattern of interlocking knots. He recognized the design. He recognized it immediately, and the recognition sent something cold and definite through his chest. His hand had closed into a fist before he realized it. He forced it open. He took a breath, then another. This was not an accident. This was not a random mother desperate enough to leave her child with a stranger. This was a message, and the message was written in silver and knots, and in the shape of a baby girl who had his eyes. Kyle pulled a box down from the top shelf of his cupboard, a place he never went, where he kept the things he never intended to use again. Inside were photographs, old ones, and letters that he'd never answered. His hands shook slightly as he sorted through them, his fingers finding the one he was looking for, a woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes, standing in front of a garden in bloom. She'd been smiling that day. He'd been younger. He'd believed in that moment that some choices could be reversed, that some debts could be left unpaid forever. The resemblance was perfect. The baby had her mother's shape in her face, yes, but everything else, everything that mattered, was his. And the key around her neck was a signature. It was a threat. It was a promise. It was also a debt come due, and Cale understood with sickening clarity that someone, somewhere, had decided that he was finally ready to pay it. The baby slept on, oblivious. Cale stood very still in his kitchen, the old photograph in one hand, the note in the other, and felt the weight of the decision already settling into place. By tomorrow, this child would be his responsibility. By tomorrow, he would have to figure out how to keep her alive and what it would cost him. By tomorrow, he would have to start looking for the woman who had left the key, either to find her or to hide from whatever had sent her away. But tonight, in this moment before Marcus arrived and before the council knew, he set the photograph back in the box. He set the note beside it. He looked at the baby one more time, memorizing her face as it was now, unmarked by the weight of what it meant to be his daughter, and he understood that his life had just fractured into before and after, and that there was no way back from this threshold. He sat down in a chair across from the counter and waited for his beta to arrive, knowing that everything was about to change, and unable to do anything but bear witness to it. Marcus arrived with the caution of a man expecting ambush. He had his phone out, his jaw tight, and the wolf sense that had kept him alive for 43 years was reading the air before he even stepped through the cabin door. Elise was behind him, her dark hair pulled back, her eyes already assessing the space for threat. She was a tracker before she was anything else, and she moved like one, silent, present, missing nothing. "The baby's asleep on the counter," Cale said, not bothering with preamble. "Someone left her here 3 hours ago." Marcus stopped. His eyes moved from Cale to the basket, then back again. "You're joking." "Do I look like I'm joking?" Elise was already moving toward the basket, her expression shifting from tactical to maternal in the space of a breath. She looked down at Ivy, and Kyle saw the moment she registered the resemblance. Her eyes came up to his, one eyebrow raised, a question that didn't need words. "Hers," Kyle said flatly. "Mine." And there was a note. He handed it to Marcus, who read it in silence, his hands curling into fists at the edges of the paper. The note was beginning to show wear from being read too many times already. Marcus handed it to Elise without comment. "M," Elise said quietly. "Margot?" The name landed like a fist. Cale didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed. "Margot from the Southside families? Margot who was supposed to be married off to—" "Don't," Cale cut him off. "Not yet." But the damage was done. The information was in the air now, and both of them understood what it meant. Margot wasn't Pack. Margot was from one of the old aristocratic shifter families that maintained their territories in careful political balance with the Packs. Her father was a regional lord with interests in timber and trade. Her mother was pure bloodline, which meant Margot was considered a valuable asset, something to be negotiated, leveraged, eventually married off to secure alliances. She was not the kind of woman who had babies with Pack alphas. She was especially not the kind of woman who abandoned those babies. "How long?" Elise asked, looking at Ivy with new eyes, the eyes of someone calculating timelines and deceptions. 6 months, maybe. She doesn't have birth documents on her. No identification. Just the basket and the note, and Cale gestured to the key around Ivy's neck. "That." Marcus leaned in, examining the pendant without touching it. His expression hardened further. "That's Southside house insignia. That's the seal of the old families." "Which means?" Cale asked, though he already knew. "Which means someone in that house is going to know that key is missing. Which means someone is going to start asking questions." Marcus stood back, running a hand through his hair. "Cale, if Margot's family finds out about this before you control the narrative, the council is going to tear you apart. An alpha who fathers a child outside Pack bonds and doesn't report it? They'll see it as a breach of protocol. A weakness. Then I don't tell them yet, Cale said. That's not realistic, Elise interjected. She was still watching Ivy, her voice soft but firm. A baby needs things. Formula, supplies, pediatric checks. You can't raise her in hiding. And someone left that key deliberately. This isn't over. This is the beginning of something. Cale moved to the window, looking out at the dark forest beyond the glass. She was right. Of course she was right. He'd known it the moment he read the note, but hearing it spoken aloud made it solid, final, inevitable. There was no way to keep this quiet. There was only the question of how to present it to the council before they heard it through rumors and amplified it into something worse. 48 hours, Marcus said, and Kyle turned back to look at him. You call an assembly. You tell them you have a daughter. You explain the circumstances in whatever way you think will damage your authority the least. And you do it before anyone else brings you this information. And if the council sees it as a liability, if they think she's a weakness, then you protect her anyway, Elise said simply, because that's what fathers do. And if they don't understand that, that's their problem, not yours. Ivy stirred in her sleep, one tiny fist uncurling, her mouth working silently as if she were feeding even in dreams. Cale found himself moving toward her, his hand reaching out before he could stop it. His fingers were scarred, calloused, built for fighting and commanding and controlling. They looked absurdly large beside her face, but he let them hover there anyway, close enough to feel the warmth of her breath. I need to know where Margot is, he said quietly. I need to know what happened to her. That key doesn't come off a woman's neck unless she's either dead or in circumstances dire enough that she'd give up her own daughter. I'll make calls, Marcus said, but carefully. If Margot's family is looking for her, they'll have people watching the usual channels. We go too loud, too obvious, and they'll know something's happening. Then go quiet, Cale said. I want to know where she is and what her status is. Is she alive? Is she willing? Is she in hiding? Or was she forced to leave the baby? Elise was checking Ivy's diaper with the practicality of someone who had done this 100 times with other people's children. She's wet. There's formula in the basket. Bottles, powder, everything. Which means whoever packed this thought about her survival for at least 12 hours. That's not abandonment. That's placement. Someone made a deliberate choice to put her here, with you, knowing you'd keep her alive. A choice or an execution of instructions, Cale said darkly. If Margot's family found out about the pregnancy, they might have orchestrated this. Plant the child with the alpha, create a scandal, use it as leverage. That's paranoid, Marcus said. That's politics, Elise corrected. She was holding Ivy now, expertly, and the baby had not woken. In the old families, everything is leverage. Everything is currency. A bastard child with pack bloodlines could be used a dozen different ways, but it could also be exactly what it looks like. A mother who was scared and did the only thing she could think of. Cale's phone buzzed, then again, and again. 3 messages in quick succession, all from council members. His stomach dropped. Where are you? We need to talk. One of the Southside scouts was spotted near your property. What's happening? Cale, answer your phone. Too late, Marcus said, reading over his shoulder. Someone knows. Someone's already talking. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in, the forest outside becoming less refuge and more cage. Kyle had built his authority on control. Control of his body, his wolf, his pack, the narrative around his leadership. He'd been careful, strategic, always 3 moves ahead of challenge. And now, in the space of 3 hours, a baby had unmade all of that. He grabbed his car keys. I'm going to the council chambers. I'm going to tell them about Ivy before the rumors can poison the well. Now? Marcus looked skeptical. It's 4 a.m. You want to wake the entire council in the middle of the night? I want to control the moment, Cale said flatly. I want them to hear this from me, not from a scout or a rumor or a phone call. I want them to see the baby. I want them to understand that this is not a vulnerability I'm hiding. It's a reality I'm claiming. Elise shifted Ivy carefully, meeting Cale's eyes. And what do you tell them about her mother? That she's under my protection, and I'm handling it, Cale said. Beyond that, they don't need to know anything yet. That's not going to satisfy them, Marcus warned. The council will want answers. They'll want to know if this is a security risk, if there's an enemy family involved, if this is somehow a trap. Then let them ask. Kale said. His voice had gone cold now, the voice of the Alpha asserting dominion, pushing through fear and doubt. But they ask me, not the baby. She's mine now. Anything that touches her goes through me first. That's the only answer they get. He moved to take Ivy back from Elise, but she stepped away from him. You go to the council, she said. Let me take her. Let me get her fed, get her dressed in something that doesn't look like she just spent the night in a basket on a porch. When you tell them about her, I want them to see her properly. I want them to see what she means to you before they can calculate how to use her. Kyle understood what she was doing, framing the narrative, preparing the emotional ground. He nodded. Marcus was already on his phone, calling the council members. Kyle could hear the words, emergency assembly, 1 hour, urgent, and he felt the gears of pack hierarchy beginning to turn, the machinery of power and politics grinding into motion around him. There would be no stopping it now. There would be no way to hide Ivy, no way to keep her separate from the demands and tensions of leadership. By dawn, the entire pack would know about her. By dawn, the council would be calculating whether she made him stronger or vulnerable. And somewhere out there in the dark, Margot was either hiding or dead, and that question would unravel everything before this was finished. Kale looked at his daughter one more time before he left the cabin, at her sleeping face, at the key around her neck, at the symbol of a debt that had finally come due. Then he turned toward the door and walked out into the October night, toward the assembly that would change everything, carrying the knowledge that he had just made the first choice that would bind him forever, and that all the choices that followed would come at a cost. He was only beginning to understand. The council chamber was housed in the old stone building that had served as pack headquarters for 90 years. It occupied the eastern wing of what used to be a colonial mansion, and the bones of it still carried that weight. High ceilings, oak paneling, a long table carved from a single piece of walnut that had been a tree when Kale's grandfather was still alive. The seats around that table were bound, inherited, earned through blood and loyalty, and the subtle calculus of pack hierarchy. Every one of them was filled by the time Kyle arrived. 8 council members, all of them awake now despite the hour, all of them with the kind of alertness that came from being dragged from sleep, with the knowledge that an alpha had called emergency assembly. Their eyes tracked him as he entered, reading the set of his shoulders, the line of his jaw, looking for signs of wound or weakness. This was how the council operated, not through words first, but through the reading of body, through the assessment of whether their leader was intact. Kyle pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat. He did not apologize for the hour. He did not soften the moment with preamble. Someone left a child at my cabin tonight, he said. 6 months old, female. She's mine. The silence that followed was the silence of predators processing information that didn't fit their expectations. Vincent, the eldest council member, and the one who still held to the old protocols most rigidly, was the first to speak. You took a mate outside of pack blessing? His voice was careful, but the implication was sharp. To take a mate without council approval was a breach of protocol, an assertion of personal choice over collective authority. It was precisely the kind of thing that could fracture a pack if it wasn't handled correctly. I didn't take a mate, Kale said. The child's mother placed her with me. The circumstances were complicated. Complicated how? This from Diane, who represented the younger generation of the council, and who had always been more pragmatic than ritualistic. Do we know who the mother is? Is she pack? Is she a threat? The mother is Southside family, Marcus interjected from his position against the wall. He'd followed Kyle into the chamber, as was his right as Beta. Her name is Margot, aristocratic bloodline. The reaction was immediate. Several council members leaned back, as if physically distancing themselves from the implications. An alpha fathering a child with someone from the old families was not just a personal matter. It was a political entanglement, the kind that could draw attention from outside entities, could create obligations or debts that rippled through pack structure. Where is she now? Vincent demanded. Where's the mother? Unknown, Kyle said flatly. She left only the child and a note. We're investigating. How long? Diane asked. How long has this child existed? And how long have you known about her? She arrived at my door 3 hours ago. I've known for 3 hours. Vincent's expression hardened. And you called assembly immediately, rather than attempting to contact the family yourself, rather than trying to manage this quietly? I called assembly because it's the right thing to do, Kale said. His voice remained steady, but there was an edge underneath it now, the edge of authority being tested. The council needs to know. The pack needs to understand that I'm not hiding, that I'm not conducting pack business in secret. That's not what this looks like, Vincent said. This looks like an alpha who made a personal choice with enormous political consequences and is now trying to frame it as transparency. The door to the chamber opened. Elise stepped inside, and she was no longer wearing casual clothes. She'd dressed in the formal gray of a keeper, the traditional role of women who tended children and elders in pack hierarchy. And in her arms, dressed now in a white cotton dress that must have come from some emergency supply, was Ivy. The baby was awake. She was quiet, alert, her pale gray eyes moving slowly around the room, as if she were cataloging faces, storing them away. She looked exactly like Cale. The resemblance was impossible to miss, impossible to dispute, impossible to rationalize away. "This is Ivy," Elise said simply. She didn't wait for permission. She moved along the table, letting each council member see the child clearly, making them confront the reality of her instead of the abstraction of the problem. When she reached Vincent, he flinched slightly. It was small, barely visible, but Cale caught it. Vincent had known then. Or at least, Vincent had suspected what this was about before they'd walked in. "You knew about her," Cale said quietly. It wasn't a question. Vincent didn't answer immediately. He was watching Ivy with an expression that was difficult to parse, something between calculation and old regret. "I knew there was a possibility," Vincent finally said. 3 years ago, the Southside families began making inquiries about Pack Alpha bloodlines. They wanted to understand the genetic markers, the strength indicators. It was framed as historical interest, genealogical research. I told you about it at the time. Kyle remembered. He remembered Vincent bringing it to him, remembered dismissing it as the kind of academic curiosity that old families indulged in. He remembered not asking enough questions. "They were breeding," Vincent continued, and his voice carried the weight of understanding that came too late, or attempting to. They wanted to create something stronger than their own bloodline, something that would give them advantage in the old game of territorial power. One of their daughters was chosen. Instructions were given. You were never informed because you never had reason to be. "You're talking about Margot like she was a broodmare," Diane said sharply. "Like she didn't have agency in this." "I'm talking about how the old families operate," Vincent said coldly. "And I'm saying that this child is not the accident anyone is claiming. This is the result of a deliberate plan. And the note that left her here is a message." Kyle felt the pieces shifting, the narrative of confused abandonment reorganizing itself into something more deliberate, more calculated. "What kind of message?" "The kind that says they've decided they're done with the arrangement," Vincent said. "The kind that says something went wrong with their daughter, and they've chosen to dissolve the obligation by placing the evidence somewhere that couldn't be ignored. They're removing her from their world. They're removing the complication. Or," Elise interjected quietly, "they're removing her to protect her from whatever they were being pressured to do." Ivy had begun to fuss slightly, the way infants do when they sense tension without understanding its source. Elise shifted her gently, and the baby's head fell against her shoulder. "This is irrelevant," Marcus said, and there was an edge to his voice that suggested he was barely holding something back. "What's relevant is that this child is here. She's Alpha's daughter, and she's under pack protection. The motivations of the Southside families are their own business until they become our business." "They already are our business," Vincent said, "because they're going to come looking for her. They're going to want to know if the placement was successful, if the child is strong, if she's worth their continued interest. And we need to be prepared for what happens when they arrive." The room fell silent. Ivy had quieted, soothed by Elise's motion and warmth, and in that silence, Cale could hear the soft tick of the clock on the wall, the whisper of fabric as council members shifted in their chairs, the weight of everyone understanding that this was no longer about protocol or pack governance. This was about the old families, the deep politics, the kind of game that played out over generations. "She stays," Kyle said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "Ivy stays with me, under pack protection, with all the rights and privileges of an Alpha's child. I don't care what the Southside families wanted. I don't care what arrangement or plan or calculation led to her being left at my door. She's here now. She's mine. And anyone who comes looking for her comes to me." Vincent leaned back in his chair, studying Cale with an expression that was difficult to read. You understand what you're saying? You understand that claiming her, protecting her, makes her a target, makes her a point of leverage? The families will use her against you. They'll threaten her, bargain with her, put her in danger to get what they want from this pack. Yes, Kyle said simply. And you're willing to accept that risk? Cale looked at his daughter, at her small face and pale eyes, at the key still hanging around her neck. I'm willing to accept anything. The silence stretched. Then Diane spoke. Then we need to prepare, she said. We need to establish watch, secure the perimeter, begin reaching out to our allies to understand what the Southside families are planning. Because Vincent is right, they will come. And when they do, we need to be ready. Cale nodded. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, council members debating protocols and security measures and how to position the pack in relation to the old families. But Cale's attention had fractured. Part of him was still in the room, performing alpha, making decisions. The other part was watching Ivy in Elise's arms, watching the baby's eyes begin to close with exhaustion, watching her small mouth fall open in sleep. When the assembly finally ended and the council members began to file out, Vincent lingered. He approached Cale and stood beside him, looking at the sleeping child. Margot, Vincent said quietly, had a twin sister. Did you know that? Kyle turned to face him. No, she was weak, Vincent continued, by the old family's standards. She didn't survive past infancy. Margot was the strong one, the one deemed worthy of attention, of plans, of use. He paused. That key around the child's neck? It's not just a symbol, it's a literal key. It opened something in the Southside estate, something that Margot thought was important enough to pass on, something worth the risk of losing her daughter. What does it open? Vincent turned to leave, his expression unreadable. That's what the families will come to find out. That's what you need to discover before they get here, because that key is why she was really abandoned. That key is the debt that's coming due, and it's going to cost you far more than you understand. Then he was gone, leaving Cale in the empty council chamber with Elise and the sleeping baby, with the weight of secrets and obligations settling across his shoulders like a stone. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise over the forest, and Cale understood that the sanctuary of the cabin was gone forever. There was no hiding now. There was only the question of what Margot had trusted him with, and what price the old families would demand for it. The first week was a masterclass in failure. Kyle had commanded armies of men, had negotiated territorial disputes that could have turned violent, had held the loyalty of a pack through cunning and strength, and the clear assertion of authority. None of that prepared him for the reality of a 6-month-old who refused to sleep for more than 90 minutes at a time, and who seemed to have an instinctive understanding of exactly which moments would cause maximum disruption to his carefully constructed existence. Elise had stayed through those first days, showing him how to mix formula, how to support Ivy's head, how to read the difference between hunger and discomfort, and the particular brand of frustration that seemed to emerge when the baby simply decided that sleeping was for lesser creatures. Cale had learned to function on fragmented sleep, to feel the weight of his daughter's small body against his chest without flinching from the vulnerability of it, to understand that the control he'd spent 40 years cultivating meant nothing to an infant who could not be intimidated or reasoned with or commanded into obedience. What surprised him was that he didn't want to. By the 8th day, he could read her moods before she verbalized them. He knew the exact rhythm of her breathing that indicated she was about to wake. He'd begun to understand that when she reached for his face with her small hands, she was not attacking, but connecting, establishing something primal and wordless that his wolf recognized even when his mind was too tired to articulate it. The bond was not something he'd chosen to build. It was something that had crystallized the moment he lifted her from that basket, and now it was the only thing that felt solid in a world that was rapidly destabilizing. It was on the 9th day that the woman appeared at his door. Cale was in the kitchen, Ivy on his hip in that way he'd learned would keep her content while he made coffee with one hand. The knock was sharp, official, the kind of knock that came from someone who expected to be admitted. His first instinct was to shift, to prepare for confrontation, but the woman's scent came through the door before her body did, familiar in a way that made his wolf go absolutely still. He opened the door to find a woman who looked enough like Margot to be her twin, but the expression was harder, older, and the eyes that met his were black, where Margot's had been brown, and held the kind of authority that came from generations of power exercised without apology. "Alpha Kale," she said. Her voice was smooth, cultured, with the accent of the old families, precise and clipped and carrying the weight of centuries. "I'm Margot's mother, Elena Southside. We need to talk about my granddaughter." Kale did not move from the doorway. "How did you find this place?" "We always knew where you were," Elena said flatly. "That was part of the arrangement. We have people who watch pack territories." She paused, her gaze moving past Kale to where Ivy was visible in the kitchen. "May I come in, or shall we conduct this business on the porch?" The threat was implicit, but clear. Make this easy, or Elena would make it difficult, and difficult meant drawing attention, meant other council members becoming involved, meant the entire thing spiraling out of his control. Kale stepped aside. Elena moved through the cabin with the demeanor of someone who was not impressed by anything. She glanced at the furniture, the kitchen, the nursery corner that Elise had helped him set up, with an expression that suggested she was calculating everything: cost, maintenance, whether it was adequate. "She's thriving," Elena said, approaching Ivy. She did not ask permission to touch the baby. She simply reached out and took her from Kale's arms, and Ivy, who had begun to develop stranger anxiety with other adults, seemed to recognize something in this woman that transcended blood and allowed her to accept the change without protest. "Where is Margot?" Kyle asked. His voice was steady, but every muscle in his body had gone rigid, preparing for whatever this visit truly meant. Elena was examining Ivy's face with the intensity of someone looking for something specific. "Margot is safe. That's all you need to know. That's not acceptable. Your acceptance is irrelevant," Elena said. But there was something underneath the coldness, a flicker of something that might have been pain. Margot made choices that her father could not permit. She revealed things that should have remained hidden. She tried to protect something that was never hers to protect. Elena looked away from Ivy to meet Kale's eyes. This child was meant to be the reconciliation. She was meant to bridge the gap between our family and yours, to create a bond that would serve both our interests. Instead, Margot destroyed that possibility by refusing her duty. What duty? Cal moved closer, his alpha presence beginning to assert itself in the small space of the cabin. "What arrangement did you make with my daughter's mother?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she handed Ivy back to him with a gentleness that contradicted everything about her demeanor. The baby fussed at the transition, and Kale's hand moved automatically to soothe her, his thumb brushing across her small back. "Margot was supposed to return to us after the birth," Elena said finally. "She was supposed to hand the child over to our keeping, to be raised in our household according to our traditions. The child was to have inherited certain privileges, certain knowledge. She was to have been trained to understand the key she would eventually inherit." Kyle's hand stilled. "The key. You've seen it?" Around her neck. Elena nodded slowly. "That key opens a vault in our family estate. Inside that vault are documents, contracts, records of agreements that go back further than your pack's existence. There are things in there that the old families have kept secret for generations. Margot was meant to be the keeper of that knowledge. She was meant to grow up understanding her duty, understanding what she would eventually be responsible for protecting. Why would you trust an outsider with something so important?" "Because you're not really an outsider," Elena said. "Your bloodline comes from the old families as well. Your grandmother was Southside. Your father broke the bond when he married your mother, but the blood remained. Ivy, through both parents, represents a merging of that legacy. She represents the possibility of something stronger than either line alone." "You wanted to breed power," Kale said. And the realization was not new, but the confirmation of it was visceral. "You wanted to create an heir who was both pack and family, who could eventually hold authority in both worlds." "Yes," Elena said simply. And Margot agreed to it. She understood her duty. She accepted the price until she didn't. What changed? Elena's expression hardened further. Margot discovered what was in the vault. She discovered what the key actually protected, and she decided that Ivy should not inherit that burden. She decided that she would rather lose her daughter than have her raised into that particular knowledge. "Where is she?" Kale asked again. And this time the question was not a demand but something closer to a plea. "In a place where she's being cared for. In a place where she can be reminded of her duty and her family without being reminded of her failure." Elena moved toward the door. "I came here to inform you that Ivy's placement with you is temporary. We will want her back when she reaches her 13th year. She will need to be trained, educated, prepared for what her inheritance means. Until then, she belongs with you. She needs to grow up believing she's Pac, believing she's safe, believing her life is uncomplicated. The truth of what she is can come later. And if I refuse, then Margot pays the price for your defiance, Elena said flatly. The choice was always going to be yours to make, but the consequences will never be yours alone to bear. Kyle stood very still, Ivy growing heavier in his arms as his muscles tensed against the weight of what was being asked of him. He was being offered 13 years with his daughter, 13 years of the bond that was already threaded through his chest like wire, and the price was agreement to give her over at an age when she could be shaped into something he might not recognize, might not be able to protect. I want proof that Margot is alive, he said. I want to know where she is. You'll get a letter, Elena said. She was at the door now, preparing to leave as suddenly as she'd arrived. Within the month, she'll be allowed to write to you occasionally to prove her survival, but you cannot contact her. You cannot attempt to find her. That's the condition of this arrangement. That's the price of Ivy living with you instead of in our household. And if I break that condition, then Ivy will be taken, and you will not see her again until she's grown and trained and no longer capable of seeing you as her father. Elena opened the door, pausing on the threshold. The old families play a longer game than Pac politics, Alpha. We think in generations. We make arrangements that transcend individual preference. Margot learned that lesson too late. I suggest you learn it faster. Then she was gone, moving across the porch and toward a car that Kyle hadn't noticed arrive, disappearing into the morning light as suddenly as she'd materialized. Kyle stood in the doorway for a long time, holding his daughter, feeling the rise and fall of her small breath against his chest. The arrangement was impossible. The conditions were unacceptable. The alternative, losing her, was inconceivable. He understood in that moment what Margot had felt. He understood the kind of love that would break all protocol, that would defy the ancient obligations of family, that would result in a woman placing her own child in a basket on a stranger's porch, because it was the only way to preserve something essential. And he understood that Elena had just told him, in her precise and calculated way, that he had already accepted these terms the moment he chose to claim Ivy, instead of return her. 13 years. He would have 13 years of his daughter, before the old families came to reclaim her. 13 years to build something strong enough that she would choose to come back to him, choose to resist whatever they wanted to make her into, choose him over duty and blood and the weight of generations. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was what he had. And so Cale held his daughter closer, and felt the first true moment of fear that had nothing to do with predators, and everything to do with the knowledge that he could lose her, and there would be nothing his strength or his authority could do to stop it. 3 months passed in the strange limbo of a life reorganized around small hands and interrupted sleep, and the particular kind of love that came with complete dependency. Ivy learned to laugh, a sound like breaking glass, sharp and delighted, and Cale learned to recognize the moment her eyes would fix on his face, with the intensity of someone who was beginning to understand that this large, scarred man was hers. The Pac had accepted the child with the pragmatic resignation of creatures who understood hierarchy. What the Alpha claimed belonged to the Alpha, and Ivy had been claimed. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, sealed with wax and the Southside insignia, delivered by courier to the Pac offices rather than to Cale directly. Marcus brought it to him without comment, but his eyes held questions that Cale was not ready to answer. The handwriting was Margot's, small, precise, with the slight tremor that Cale remembered from years ago, from a time when he'd believed that choices could be simple, and that love could exist without calculation. The letter was short. Cale, I hope Ivy is safe. I hope she's loved. I know that if I asked you for that, you would have refused me out of pride and protocol, so I took the choice away from you by leaving her in the only way that would force your hand. I cannot come back. My father has made it clear that if I attempt to leave again, if I attempt to contact you directly, Ivy will be taken from you permanently. They've already begun the paperwork to claim her as a ward of the family, to position her for eventual custody if you're deemed unfit to raise her. The only thing stopping them is the fact that you've proven capable, that you've protected her and loved her the way they knew you would. I made a choice to give her to you because I saw what my life would be. I saw the vault and what was inside it. I saw the ledgers that prove what my family has done, what we've been doing for 300 years, and I could not bear the thought of Ivy inheriting that knowledge, inheriting that burden, becoming the keeper of our sins instead of having the chance to become something pure. The key is not just a key. It's a promise that can never be broken, a debt that compounds with every generation, a contract written in blood that predates your pack's existence. If Ivy ever opens that vault, if she ever learns what we're protecting, she will be bound to it the way I am bound. She will be trapped. I chose to trap myself instead. I chose exile. I chose to accept my family's worst punishment so that she could be free, so that she could grow up believing her life was her own. I need you to understand something. What I feel for you was never false. What we had, in those brief moments when we were alone, was the most real thing I've ever experienced. But I was trained from birth to use that realness as a tool, to manipulate it, to weaponize it for family advantage. I betrayed that training when I left Ivy with you. I betrayed it when I chose her life over the family's plans. And now I'm asking you to betray yours, to keep her safe not just from external threats, but from the truth of what she is. In 13 years, my family will come to collect her. I cannot stop that. What I can do is ask you to make her into someone strong enough to choose her own path when that day comes. Make her into someone who loves you more than she fears obligation. Make her into someone who will remember her infancy with you as the realest part of her life, so real that when my family tries to convince her of her duty, she will choose love over legacy. I cannot be the one to teach her that, but you can. I am alive. I am safe as someone in my position can be. I am writing this from a room with a view of the garden where I grew up, and I am writing it knowing that this is the last communication you will receive from me. My father has given me permission to write once. This is that once. After this, I am required to forget you. I am required to perform the role of dutiful daughter, to accept the life my family has chosen for me, to become the keeper of the vault I tried so desperately to escape. Forgive me for the choice I made. Forgive me for taking her from you without warning, for the pain that decision has caused. But please, do not forgive me so easily that you forget why I did it. Remember what this letter says. Remember it when my family comes to claim her. Remember that you're her only protection against becoming what I became. I love you. I will not say that again. I cannot afford to. M. Cale read the letter 3 times, then a 4th, his hands shaking incrementally with each pass. The words blurred in a way that had nothing to do with his eyesight. He was standing in the office, Marcus somewhere behind him, the weight of the pack headquarters pressing down, and all he could see was Margot's face, the way she'd looked in those stolen moments, the way her fear had manifested as precision, the way she'd moved through the world like someone bracing for impact. Cale, Marcus said carefully. What does it say? It says she made a choice, Kyle said quietly. It says she's never coming back. It says my daughter is carrying a burden I don't fully understand, and in 13 years, people are going to come to collect her for reasons that have nothing to do with love and everything to do with obligation and legacy. He set the letter down on the desk. His hands were still shaking, which was a problem because alphas did not shake, did not show fracture in their resolve. He forced them flat against the wood. It says she did this to protect Ivy, he continued. It says she accepted exile, accepted her family's punishment, accepted never seeing her daughter again, so that Ivy could have one choice in her life that was truly hers. That's a hell of a gift, Marcus said quietly. It's a hell of a burden, Cale corrected, because now I know why I have her. Now I understand that this isn't a mistake or an accident, or even a moment of weakness on Margot's part. This is calculated sacrifice. This is her betting everything that I love her enough to do what she couldn't do herself. Before Marcus could respond, Elise appeared in the doorway. She was holding Ivy, and her expression was different, urgent, with an edge of panic that Elise rarely displayed. Cale, we have a problem, she said. There's a woman in the clinic. She was brought in by one of the border patrols about an hour ago. They found her in the woods, half dead from exposure and injury. She's refusing medical attention until she sees you. Who is she? She won't say, but she has the Southside insignia on her wrist, and she's asking for you specifically. Cale was already moving, was already pushing past the shock of the letter, was already operating on the logic of immediate threat and immediate response. The clinic was on the eastern edge of Pack territory, a small building that served as both medical facility and sanctuary for injured wolves who needed to shift between forms without drawing human attention. The woman on the examination table was barely conscious. She was covered in bruises. Her right arm was broken and badly set. and her dark hair was matted with blood. But her eyes opened when Cale entered, and they were brown, and they were unmistakably Margot's. He didn't allow himself to process the shock. He moved to the table and took her unbroken hand, his alpha presence settling over her like a blanket. "What happened?" he asked quietly. "Escaped," Margot said, and her voice was rough from disuse or pain or both. 3 days ago. My father discovered I'd written to you. He discovered I'd told you about the vault, about the key. He said I'd betrayed the family beyond redemption. He said Ivy would be taken, that you would be destroyed, that the only way to salvage the situation was for me to disappear permanently. Where were you? Being prepared, Margot said, and there was something in her eyes that made Cale's wolf go absolutely still. Being made ready to accept a marriage contract to one of the other families, a political arrangement that would secure our position. I was to be used as a bridge between houses, the same way I was supposed to be used with you, the same way Ivy was supposed to be used. My father doesn't waste valuable assets. He recycles them. Kyle squeezed her hand slightly. How did you escape? My sister, Margot said. The one I told you about. The one who didn't survive infancy. I lied. She survived. She's been living in the family estate under guard, under medication, kept separate because she was deemed weak. She helped me. She has access to places I don't, and she used that access to get me out. Margot's breath came in shallow gasps. But it means she'll be punished. It means my father will be looking for her, will understand that she helped me, will make her pay for my escape. Where is she now? Safe, or as safe as she can be. I got her to the boundary of your territory and told her to run toward the human cities, to become someone the family couldn't track. I don't know if she made it. Kyle understood what this meant. Margot had not escaped for herself. She'd escaped because she'd finally found a way to break the cycle, to give her sister what she'd tried to give Ivy, a chance at a life that wasn't predetermined, wasn't owned, wasn't owed to the machinery of family obligation. You have to send me away, Margot said, and her voice had gone urgent despite the pain. You have to do it now, today. My father will send people looking for me. The moment they discover I'm here, they'll know you were involved. They'll claim you harbored a runaway, that you violated treaty agreements, that you've committed an act of aggression against their family. I'm not sending you anywhere, Cale said flatly. You have to. To protect Ivy. If my father has grounds to claim you've broken your obligations, he'll use it to take her immediately. He'll use it to neutralize you as a threat. I don't care, Kyle said, and the words were absolute, were irreversible, were the kind of words that changed everything. I don't care what he threatens or what he claims. You're here. You're mine. And I'm not letting you go again. Margot's hand convulsed in his. That's not how this works. That's not how the families operate. You can't just decide to claim me. You can't just defy 300 years of contract and obligation and— I can, Cale said. He turned to the healer who had been standing quietly by the wall, trying to give them privacy. Fix her, splint that arm, treat the wounds, whatever she needs. Kyle, Margot said, and now there was fear in her voice. Not fear of her family, but fear of what his choice meant, fear of the consequence that would inevitably follow. If you do this, if you claim me as mate, if you establish pact bond with me, my family will declare war. They will use every resource they have to destroy you. Let them try, Cale said simply. He leaned down and kissed her, and it was not tender or gentle. It was a declaration, an assertion, a claiming that went beyond words and into the language that predators understood, the language of territory and possession, an irrevocable choice. When he pulled away, Margot was crying, and her tears were the tears of someone who had finally been given what she'd never allowed herself to want, because wanting it meant believing it was possible. We have to tell the council, the healer said quietly. We have to inform them immediately. If war is coming, they need to prepare. Kyle understood what that meant. He understood that by claiming Margot, by refusing to send her back, by establishing her as his mate, he was making a choice that would fracture his pack, that would damage his position, that would put Ivy in greater danger than she'd ever been before. But when he looked at Margot's face, at the way her fear was beginning to transform into something that looked like hope, he understood also that some choices could not be unmade once they were spoken into existence. Some bonds, once claimed, demanded everything, and he was willing to pay whatever price his claim demanded, because the alternative, a life where he chose political safety over love, where he chose obligation over truth, was a life he could not survive. The war never came. That was the thing that surprised everyone. The Southside families gathered their forces at the territorial boundary, made their threats through official channels, positioned their lawyers and their old money leverage, but they did not attack. Instead, they waited. And in their waiting, something shifted in the balance of power. Other packs began to question why the old families would threaten, but not strike. Other families began to wonder if perhaps the mythology of their invincibility had been exaggerated, and slowly, through the patient work of diplomacy and the simple fact of survival, Cale transformed what could have been catastrophe into a tenuous stalemate. 13 years passed in the quiet accumulation of ordinary moments. Ivy grew tall, with her mother's intelligence and her father's stubborn refusal to accept limitation. She learned to shift at 8, learned to fight at 10, learned to read a room the way pack leaders learned to read terrain. Margot, freed from the medication that had dulled her for so long, began to heal in ways that had nothing to do with physical injury. She taught Ivy the languages her own mother had taught her the history that the old families tried to hide, taught her that duty could be chosen rather than inherited. The night before Ivy's 13th birthday, Cale found Margot on the cabin porch, the same porch where Ivy had arrived in a basket, though the cabin had been rebuilt now, expanded, transformed into something that resembled a home rather than a hunting shelter. Margot was holding the key, turning it over in her hands. It had been removed from Ivy's neck years ago, kept safe, never discussed directly but always present in the space between them. She knows what it means, Margot said quietly. She knows what choosing to open it would cost her. What does she want to do? Kyle asked, moving to stand beside his mate. She wants to choose, Margot said. She wants to go to the vault. She wants to know what we've been protecting her from. And then she wants to decide what to do with that knowledge. Cale understood what that meant. It meant the truce would end. It meant the old families would demand their due, would expect their heir to accept her inheritance, would begin the machinery of obligation once more. It meant Ivy would have to choose between the father who had claimed her without hesitation and the family whose blood ran through her veins. But it also meant that Ivy, unlike her mother, would make that choice fully conscious of what it demanded. She would choose with her eyes open, with her father's love as ballast, and her mother's sacrifice as precedent. She would choose not because she was trapped, but because she understood the weight of what she was choosing and accepted it anyway. Then we let her choose, Cale said. The next morning, Ivy stood in the living room in formal clothes, gray like a keeper, silver like the old families. She held the key in her hand, and her eyes, pale, gray, and familiar, moved between her father and her mother. "I'm going to open the vault," she said. Her voice was steady, certain, nothing like the infant who had arrived in darkness. "And then I'm coming home, but I need to know what I'm coming home from." She took the key and left, disappearing into the forest toward the Southside estate, and Cale felt Margot's hand find his. They stood together in the silence of what they had built, understanding that this was the consequence of love, that it did not protect from choice, but rather demanded that choice be possible, demanded that the people you loved be free, even when that freedom threatened to take them away. On the table beside the window sat a letter, addressed in careful script, "For when I return." It was not opened. It was not meant to be opened until Ivy came back, until she had seen the vault and learned its secrets, and decided what to do with the knowledge of what her family had done. Outside, the moon was rising over the forest, full and close, the same moon that had haunted Cale's restlessness years ago. And in the distance, in the direction of the family estate, a light burned steady and true, a promise kept, a debt acknowledged, a future still unmade but no longer feared.